Welcome to our Transition Talks, a series of interviews of former athletes to discuss their athletic retirement, their transition away from sport, and what they've learned through that process. My name is Miriam Glaise. I am the founder of Athlete Soul, and I'm here today with Megan Parker, who is a former international diver for Canada. She had a very long career of 17 years with the Canadian national team. And she will tell us about her athletic retirement and what she's learned through the transition. I'll see you in there. Welcome, Megan. Thanks for joining us for our Transition Talk interview. We are really looking forward to hearing your story as a competitive diver for Canada, how you retired, and then what you're doing now. But before we jump into that conversation about your athletic retirement and how you experienced that, I'd love for you to give us a summary of your competitive career.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. This is really wonderful speaking with you today. So I first started diving when I was 8 years old. I had a very active childhood. I did a lot of different sports, figure skating, swimming, diving, gymnastics, cross country, tennis, you name it, I did it. But I started to get serious with diving. Well, when I turned 9, actually, I went to my first age group nationals. And I actually came last. I failed to dive and came last. But in the following year, when I was 10, I came back to the nationals and I came first. So I had some really early success, and that was super encouraging. At age 13 is when I stopped doing other sports. So I quit my gymnastics and swimming, and I really just focused on diving, starting at age 13. From age 10, when I made the junior national team, I was on either a junior national or senior national team for 17 years. So I had a really successful career. I was traveling the world. I had something like 22 national titles. I went to the Pan Am Games. I came 5th. I came 4th at the Goodwill Games. I twice got silver at the World University Games. So had a lot of success over the years and had a wonderful career. Absolutely loved what I did. I was the youngest diver at Olympic trials when I was 13 years old. I went back at the 92 Olympic trials and was an alternate on the Olympic team for Canada. And then I went to my last Olympic trials. I retired after my last Olympic trials when I was 25 years old.
Well, that is a pretty long career, pretty impressive, and I'm sure it involved a lot of training and a lot of travel, obviously going to all these competitions. And I'm really curious. We're gonna talk now about your retirement because you mentioned several times Olympic trial and being on the national team. So how did the retirement come about?
Yeah, so I reluctantly retired at age 25. I knew going into that year it was probably going to be my last year of diving because my body, I had a lot of injuries and my body was just completely broken down at this point. So just to step back a little bit, when I was 21, I went to the Olympic trials and I was sort of at the peak of my career. And I went into the trials. I went into the finals actually in 2nd place. So in diving, the top 2 make the Olympic team, and on each board. And I was a platform specialist for the most part at this point, certainly. And going into the finals that night, I was in 2nd place. And my sister was in 1st place, and only 2 get to go. And I ended up coming 3rd at the end of the finals. So obviously very devastating. My sister ended up winning. That was extremely difficult for my entire family, but especially for me because my sister was like living out my dream. So after I just missed the Olympic team, I knew I didn't want to retire, but I was really struggling with that failure basically, or feeling like I was a failure. And I took some time away from sport, and I went, and at my parents' encouragement, I went and studied abroad in Vienna. I actually spoke three languages back then. And so I used that and took advantage of it and went and studied abroad and took 6 months off diving. And that was the perfect break that I needed to find my motivation and drive. I knew that I wanted to come back. So I came back the following year and had actually even better year. I was ranked 5th in the world on the European circuit. So that break was really a great benefit to me. Unfortunately, the following years, my body started to fall apart and I started to get some really serious injuries and mental blocks. So I experienced the twisties or mental blocks in diving, which was really challenging. But my goal was always to make that Olympic team. It'd been my dream since I was 13 years old. So I just pushed through it, for the next few years. In that last year of diving, I was pretty crippled. Like I would find myself stuck in the parking lot after driving to practice and I couldn't even walk. I had sharpshooting pains down my back, down my leg. Turns out I have degenerative disc disorder. I had a slip disc. I had SI, sacroiliitis, so a whole bunch of stuff going on just from the wear and tear over the years on my body. And so it's kind of living off of cortisone injections. So going into the Olympic trials, I knew I wasn't at my peak, unfortunately, but I was just so determined to not give up on my dream. So had a few more cortisone injections, went to trials and ended up 5th. So it wasn't my best performance. I missed one dive pretty badly, which I was really disappointed about, but I just knew I couldn't go on anymore. Like my body was completely done. And honestly, at that point, age 25 and diving back when I was retiring was kind of old. Like we weren't making money the way athletes are now. And so I really felt that I needed to move on with my life, get a real job, move on. So I was kind of mentally preparing for that, but hadn't totally accepted it until I missed the Olympic team. My sister actually made that Olympics. She won again. So she went off to the Olympics and I struggled with that retirement because I felt like, one, I didn't reach my goal of making the Olympic team. So my dreams were shattered. 2, I felt a bit forced out because of my injury and that I wasn't able to have the most successful year or the best performance because I was in so much pain and spent so much time at the doctor and the physical therapist and chiropractor, massage therapist. And I spent just as much time treating my body as I did training. And so I just felt like I'd failed on both fronts. So that was really hard for me. The other thing was that I had been so single-mindedly focused on my diving career that I wasn't mentally prepared to move on and take that next step. So I struggled for several years. I had a sense of loss, a void that I was trying to fill. I just knew that whatever I did next, I wanted to have as much passion and, love as I did for the sport of diving. And I just found that was really hard. I was seeking something that would fill that void in me. And took a long time.
Yeah, and so much to unpack from everything you just said. I think for people to realize that in diving, you get started really early, but diving from 13 to the age of 21 at your first Olympic trial is a very long time of diving at the highest level, and it definitely is a lot of wear and tear on your body. Diving is a pretty rough sport, and the impact is really important. It's amazing that you were able to do all these years, and then you missed on your first trial, and I can see the build up and the injuries after that. What an amazing path and career. I would like to ask you about that sort of sibling relationship and how you two managed being in the same sport, competing against each other, going after the same goals, knowing that there were only 2 spots. And it could have been the 2 of you, but there's also a lot of other competitors. I'm curious how you've handled that relationship throughout your career.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a great question. We were kind of known as the Gordon sisters, and she was 2 years younger than me. So when we were diving in age group, we were not competing against each other. It wasn't so we actually made all the same junior national teams. We traveled the world together. I mean, for my parents, it was wonderful. They would one drop off, one pick up, and we were always together. So it was great. But then it was more when we aged out of the age groups and we were competing at the senior level, that then we are taking spots from each other. I was the older, the older sibling. And so I had a little bit of an advantage from that perspective. Also, she was a springboard and platform diver. She did both 3 meter and 10 meter, but her specialty was 3 meter. And my specialty, I sort of did 1 meter and 10 meter, but my specialty was 10 meter. So for many years, it kind of worked out that she would go for springboard and I would go for platform. And truthfully, in 92, at the 92 Olympic trial, she was supposed to make it on the springboard. But that was kind of the joke. Like, we used to joke that she'll make it on 3 meter, I'll make it on 10 meter, and then we'll both go to Olympics and it'll be great. That was like the way it was supposed to work out. But she didn't have the best performance on 3 meter. It was earlier in the week. And my sister is one of the most determined, hardworking people you've ever met, which made her a great training partner, by the way. But she just came back with a vengeance, and she was just so focused because she had missed her goal of making the Olympics. And so she had nothing to lose on platform, and she dove her mind out. So she really deserved to win that event. But it really wasn't the way it was supposed to work out. So anyway, we have a great relationship. We're best friends. I used to joke that we are also biggest enemies, because when we were in competition, we were very focused, and it was really each for ourselves. But as training partners, I couldn't have asked for a better training partner. She pushed me harder than anyone could have. We were getting each other up in the morning, early in the morning, to go to practice, driving each other to practice. When one of us needed some motivation, the other one was there for us. And so it was great also because when we had injuries or we didn't reach our goals or we had issues, we could talk to each other about it. So that was wonderful, just to have somebody who I lived with 24/7 who could really relate to what I was going through. It made it hard when one of us made a team and the other one didn't, because we were both fiercely competitive. So, but we're still like best friends today. So.
Absolutely, and you're describing it perfectly, like that relationship, that pushing each other day in and day out in practice, like having the ability to have a training partner who is going to push you to the end and knows you really well is really what makes the difference. And her success is probably really tightly attached to you being there and you pushing the envelope on the performance. So it's quite incredible to have been able to share that together as family members. That doesn't happen often, and it's quite amazing. How do you live now, and how you obviously had some challenges and some failures and some bigger than others, and like you said, for your sister as well, typically athletes will rebound really fiercely after a failure, and this is what drives us, right? This is what makes us better. In her case, it did for that qualification. In your case, it did also, not only the break, but rebounding from missing out on the Olympic trial the first time. Is this something that you have seen throughout your career and that you continue to use? And did you use that drive in the same way after you retired? Like the fact that you felt maybe you didn't reach your goal, did that fuel you for what was afterwards?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've always been a goal-driven person. I love having goals set for myself. I love having something to look forward to achieving. And I've always been the type of person who's always wanted to improve myself. And I think that diving sort of lends itself to that, because diving's an aesthetic sport. It's a judge sport. Out of, you're judged out of 10, but like, to be perfect is really hard to be perfect. So I accepted that early on, but it was always trying to improve. So when you're diving, you're always trying to make your dive better somehow. And then once you've improved one thing, you move on to the next thing, right? There's always a million things you got to work on. And so having that sort of growth mindset, I didn't know that was what it was called back then, but something I talk about a lot now, especially when I coach my divers. We talk a lot about having a growth mindset and always wanting to improve where you're at and be better at what you're at. And we don't talk about being perfect, because, it's not good to talk about wanting to be perfect all the time, but trying to improve yourself and be a better version of yourself. And so I just feel like that has carried over in all areas of my life. I have always wanted to like grow personally, professionally. I've always been really into personal development and reading about how to be better at things. And so I feel like I'm kind of a lifelong learner that way. And I think that definitely stemmed from my, athletic days.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that a lot of athletes share in their life after sport, is that will just continue to better yourself and continue to learn and continue to like create a better version of yourself. Um, I want to ask you about the missing on the Olympics and how you feel about this now. Have you come to term with it? Like, how do you live with that? I've talked to quite a few athletes who've missed out, and life goes on, and you have to continue past your playing years. And so I'm curious, how you feel about the situation.
Yeah, it took a really long time. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it took a very long time to get over that disappointment, that loss. I mean, it still hurts, let's be honest. But I've definitely moved on from that. I mean, it's been a long time. It's been like 25 years. So well, since I retired, but I just feel like it just hurt a lot. Probably it was especially hard because I watched my sister succeed not once but twice, and living with her during that, and sort of the like glory that went with it, and just being excited and happy for her, knowing that she kind of took a spot away from me, or even though there was another, two other people, one other person, but like just like that loss of watching her fulfill my dream was hard, and I couldn't get away from it. So if it's somebody else, another competitor, you don't have to live with them every day and deal with that. So like that was kind of being rubbed in my face. Not that she was rubbing in my face, just that like it felt that way, salt in the wound, because I was exposed to it all the time. She's extremely modest and like never talks about it, and I, as with time, obviously with age, with time, with maturity, just it's gotten easier. And I'm able now to look back and realize what an amazing, fulfilling career I had. At the time, it felt like the world was ending, right? Like I felt like no one understood, because people would always say to me, but look at the career you've had. Look at the amazing things you've done, the amazing places you've been, the people you've met. And now I know that, I recognize that. But at the time, the wound was so deep, it was so hard that I couldn't accept that. And I remember I used to do a lot of motivational speaking to communities around Canada and British Columbia. And I remember speaking at an event saying that like I felt like my life was over at 25, and they're all like, what? They all laughed and they couldn't believe it, but for me it felt that way. Of course, now at my age, I have children and I have such a fulfilling career that like that is definitely in the past, and I still feel pain when I see people who just missed out on the Olympics or just missed out on the podium. Like I can feel their pain because I know what that feels like. So it's just shared experience, right? That many of us have. So, yeah.
And how did that go with the athletic retirement? So you experienced a lot of different emotions and things going on and challenges at the moment of that retirement. You had a lot of injuries, your body was breaking down, you missed out on your Olympic dream, and then you came to terms to the fact that you were going to retire. So that's a lot of things mixed in one giant emotion pot. And I'm curious, like how you dealt with everything, and how was the period of time right after you ended diving?
Right. So I ended up retiring after the Olympic trials. We had one more sort of provincial state meet, and I went to that. And I remember thinking, standing on the 10-meter for my very last dive, thinking, this is the last time I'm ever going to do this dive. This is the best shape I'm ever going to be in, mentally, physically, everything. And I remember doing my dive and ending on a great note and coming first. And so that was a great way to sort of have closure. Having said that, my sister and my family were heading off to the Olympics to go watch her compete. So that was always still there. I was coaching diving at the time, and staying, like giving back, being at the pool. I think was a great way for me to stay connected and stay involved, but it was also a very painful way to still stay connected and involved. So sort of, that was a little challenging. I did it because I loved the sport and I wanted to give back, but it was, and it was a way for me to stay involved, but it was also a painful way to stay involved. So then I felt like I really needed to kind of get away from the sport of diving and just close that door for a while. I went and I had a business degree and I had an amazing network of support. My family, my husband, well, my boyfriend at the time is now my husband. I have an amazing group of friends. So I had a great support network. The hardest part truly at that time for me was admitting to people that I was struggling and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Like, they looked at me like, you have a great business degree, you had an amazing career, like, move on. And I just had this empty void that I couldn't understand why I felt the way that I did. And I was kind of too afraid to ask for help. And back then, mental health really wasn't a word. Like, people didn't talk about asking for help or going to a therapist or seeing somebody. And I was always the tough, strong one. I never needed help really from anyone, and so asking for help was really hard for me. The Canadian Olympic Association offered a sports psychologist, not a sports psychologist. It was a psychologist for me to speak to. So I took them up on that offer. And I remember going to his office. It was like an older man. We were it was like a downtown office building, all dark wood, and he had a suit on, and he had me come in and sit down, and he asked me some questions like, how's your relationship with your mother? And he asked me all these questions about my past. And I just looked at him and I was like, you don't understand. Like, I just retired from a sport that I love dearly. I spent 17 years, twice a day practices, eat, sleep, breathe the sport of diving. I failed to reach my dream, not once, but twice. And I'm feeling lost and I need help. But he just looked at me and he just didn't understand. And I kind of walked out of there and I just said, I'm not going back to see him. He has no idea what I'm going through. And I felt like I went through that transition alone. My sister was continuing to compete. She actually at that point moved away. She was still diving. So she was still living that dream that I wanted to live, but I couldn't. And my husband, or my boyfriend at the time now, my husband was an amazing person to speak with. Like, he was absolutely fantastic, but yet he wasn't an elite athlete at the same level. He hadn't gone through that same, transition that I was going through. And then a couple of my teammates who retired at the same time were just done with the sport. Like, they couldn't wait to be done. And so they weren't struggling with it. So I kind of felt like, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way? And so when I talked to my parents, who were amazing, they kept giving me suggestions and ideas of things I could do. Just move on, look at all the things you can do, just go move on. And I think what I really needed was someone to talk to, someone who could just hear me out and help me think about my values and what it is truly that I wanted to do. And I just needed that sounding board and that person to guide me through that transition. And I didn't have that. So I did a lot of trial and error, and I went out and got a bunch of jobs and did some informational interviews. And I had a few jobs that I tried and didn't love, because I was like, where's the passion? Like, I can do this. I can do anything you ask me to do, right? I was looking for something that I was truly passionate about. And that was just hard to find for a long time.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, you've done something for 20 years at the highest level with a lot of passion, and then trying to find that again is really difficult. I relate and hear a lot of what you're saying for that period of transition and the isolation and loneliness of and sometimes guilt and shame when you're talking about not being able to talk about it and share with people, or not being understood. I think a lot of athletes feel that, especially those who have on paper a perfect situation, a college degree from a great school, lots of success in their sport, kind of, went to their mid-20s or even longer. For people, for the general public, that sounds like a very successful athletic career. And yet it doesn't matter whether you're successful or not. Like you will still experience that void and that loss and sort of that lack of purpose. So I think you really related that brilliantly.
I think that's you just nailed it on the head. It's that sense of loss that I don't think a lot of people realize, certainly non-athletes who haven't been at that level, but it's really a loss of identity. I knew myself as a diver, 24/7. That's who I was. Everyone knew me that way. And I went to school and I got my business degree and did very well in school. But even though it was a little bit going through the motions at school, because I was always focused on my dream of making the Olympics. And so, I checked all the boxes and did everything I was supposed to do. But at the end of the day, it was that like, now what? Who am I now? And that loss of identity is absolutely huge. I think that was a really big part. And I kept saying to people like, well, now I have to go be like a regular person. And that's kind of weird. I don't know how to be a regular person. And my boyfriend would like laugh at me. But that was the way I felt. The other thing I think was really hard is when you are excelling at something and you are the best in the world at what you do, suddenly starting back at square one can be really difficult. And accepting that can be really hard. So I remember my friends at work invited me to come play beach volleyball with them after work on Tuesday nights. And I was like, okay, I have no idea. I can't even play beach volleyball. Like the idea of putting myself out there and being bad at something was really hard for me to do. One of the best things I did was do that. And then my boyfriend, husband at the time, started ultimate frisbee team, and I didn't want to miss out because fear of missing out. So I was like, I want to join the team, but I don't know how to throw a frisbee. But I miss that team environment. I miss being part of something, and I miss the competitiveness. Like I was looking to fill that void, that competitive. I didn't have any competition in my life at this point, right? So I joined his ultimate frisbee team. It was one of the best things I did. I found my mojo. I found my competitive spirit again. I learned something new. I improved my skills. Like all those things I talk about with diving, like always trying to improve. I found that in a little hobby, once I retired. So like no one told me I needed to do that. I just kind of figured it out. But that was a really great sort of saving grace, something that I did that really helped with the transition.
And I think it's not necessarily easy. I think people really underestimate how much it takes to go and try new things, especially when you've been an expert at something for so long. Putting yourself in that mindset again, to be challenged and possibly ridiculed. And I think that's really important for athletes, because when you mentioned, being a regular person, and I think that really convey like this idea, the fear that athletes have of being a regular person, of being kind of normal, of being not exceptional. And there's sort of a lot of like ego and arrogance kind of intertwine. And that comes in that transition moment where you're like, oh, hang on, I'm not so special anymore, and I'm going to have to go and do the same as everybody else. I think athletes are really scared of that. They don't know if they're going to like it. They don't know if they're going to get that fire inside and that purpose again. So I think you described that really, really well.
Yeah. I think also just wanting to just be really good at what you do. And you've worked for so many years to accomplish that and get to that level, starting from scratch. I think that was the hardest thing for me, was like starting back at zero again was scary, really scary. And then also feeling behind because my peers had graduated from college. I took a little extra time, an extra year to graduate so I could train, at the same time, because I was going to school full time. But so I took a fifth year. And so my peers had moved on and started working and were, they had also spent a lot of time. They had a lot more free time during their high school, college years to seek out their passions and their hobbies. Whereas I hadn't. I was really focused 100% on my training and my diving and traveling. So then suddenly when that is gone, that all those hours you spent, 25 hours a week is suddenly gone. Now, okay, what are my hobbies? What are my passions? What do I like to do? There's a lot of pressure to kind of figure that out really quickly. but while also feeling like you're behind everyone. Everyone's a couple years ahead of you. And even though at that time I was really young, and I realize that now, I feel like this is advice I can give to, athletes who are a lot younger than me. It's just like, oh, to be that age again, like all the things that are still ahead of you. But at the time I didn't feel that way. I felt a lot of pressure to be successful again, right? To move on and be successful in the next thing that I'm doing. But I didn't even know what I wanted to do. So there was a lot going on. There's a lot going on.
I hear really taking your time, kind of sitting a little bit to reflect and learning, what you like and what you want to try, and trying your different things, and sort of it's okay to sit still a little bit for a little bit before you kind of move on and move forward. I'm curious if you have any other advice for athletes who are going to go through their transition.
I do. I do. I think it's really important. Well, you even said it, being able to just sit still and not be moving all the time, not always be trying to accomplish and achieve, and just being able to sit in silence and be quiet with yourself and be uncomfortable. That's a super important skill. So meditating is something I really believe in, helping athletes, but also not being afraid to think about the things that you want to do in your spare time. So taking up those hobbies, trying those things while you're an athlete, and not waiting till your career is over to then start those sort of things. So thinking about, what are some things I'd like to do when I'm done with my sport, when I have more free time in my life? What are some things I'd like to try? What are some careers that I might want to explore? And just having those thoughts during your athletic career so that you're sort of mentally preparing for when that time comes, I think is really important. Thinking about it, reading about other people, listening to other people's athletic stories and transition stories is a great way to get some ideas about maybe what you want to do moving forward. So I think just sort of planning for that, preparing for that is really important, and something you can do while you're an active athlete. Doesn't take a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we advocate for all the time at Athletes Soul, it's you can learn about yourself, your interests, what you like doing outside of sport, and kind of building different layers to obviously your athletic identity is your most dominant identity when you're an athlete, but you can build other layers and other aspects of your life so that you feel, a little bit more balanced when a retirement comes. Megan, we haven't really talked about what you do now, so I'd love for you to tell us what is fulfilling your days these days.
So I still coach diving a few days a week, all levels of diving. I love it. I've done it for years, ever since I retired. I've always sort of dabbled and kept involved in that because I do love that. I didn't become a full-time diving coach because of the lifestyle, and my husband and I decided that I would be the caregiver, the primary caregiver. I was always waiting to find something that I was truly passionate about, and the time actually, I feel grateful that I waited for the right opportunity to come along. But I am currently a performance and transition coach for athletes. And I fell into this area because couple of things. First of all, I knew that I wanted to go back to work full time when my kids were old enough. They didn't need me around 20, to drive them after school and all that. I could actually dedicate myself to something. So I always had part-time work that I did, and diving coaching, but I knew that when the kids were old enough, I was going to do something I really want to sink my teeth into and give all my time to. So I actually hired a career coach to work with me to figure out what it is that I was passionate about, what I wanted to do. And around the same time, I watched the documentary, The Weight of Gold, and I just had a very visceral reaction to it. I was actually bawling my eyes out. My husband was like, "Are you okay?" I was just like, that hit home so badly, like so strongly for me, that I decided, like right there, that I want to work with athletes. I mean, I always knew I wanted to work with athletes, but I wanted to help athletes avoid and prevent some of those situations and that athletes get into with their career transition. So while working with my coach, I decided to go back to school and get my leadership coaching certification. And then, like I said, I'm now a performance and transition coach for athletes. These are the two areas that I'm most passionate about: helping athletes overcome obstacles, improve performance, find joy and happiness. That's the one area that I work with athletes on. And then the other side is helping them plan for a smooth transition out of sport. So I either get the athlete while they're current athletes and we can work through that stuff, or they're going through a transition, or they've already transitioned out of sport and they're struggling. So I can help them in all different areas. And I absolutely love what I do because I just feel like I'm making such an amazing difference in these people's lives. And I wish I'd had these resources when I was retiring. So I'm really grateful that I get to do what I do.
Yeah, and obviously what you do is something that we can certainly resonate with. You know, that's the whole purpose of Athletes All is to help athletes through their transition. So love what you're doing and love that you're working with the athletes that are still competing. And it feels to me that you know you've gone full circle, and that experience of transition and perhaps also your failure with the games, you know, is what has brought you here to help other athletes and share how they can handle those failures themselves and have support on their side. So I think, you know, I always think like what we've done a while back is what lead us here, and it seems that it is relevant for you. So it's great.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I not only was I an athlete, but I come from a family of athletes, and then I have two student athletes myself, and I actively coach the sport of diving. So I feel like I have so many touch points and places where I can help athletes improve. And I bring a lot of my performance coaching into my sport coaching. And so I think they all blends really nicely. But I also can relate as a parent, I can relate as an athlete, I can relate as a sibling. I just have so many areas and experiences that I can draw on that I find really help. And so I feel like I can really relate and resonate with my student athletes, which helps. So.
Yeah, it seems like you have your pulse on many different aspects of the sport industry, which is great. Any last word, Megan, before we close out? This was incredible, and it's fantastic to hear your story.
No, I think the last thing I'd say, maybe some recommendations or advice for athletes who are maybe listening to this. I feel people ask me this like all the time, like, do you have any advice for me as I get closer to my retirement? And I think there's a couple of things I'd like to leave with. Is just, like I said before, don't leave your thinking about your next steps to the very last minute. So plan for your transition in advance. It's okay to think about it while you're actively competing. Your brain can have space for both. The second thing is maintain your sport network. I have amazing friends around the world, and thanks to social media especially, I've been able to maintain those friendships. And I think that's really important, is to maintain your network of your community. If you spend a lot of time in that sport, they're wonderful people who are just like you, and they can also give back to you in ways you may not realize. So I think maintaining that sport network. And then the last thing is just to remember that you are not your performance, and that the next stage, like looking at the next stage of your life, is like the next chapter in your book. So I had this great quote where, like, the pen is in your hand and you get to write that next chapter. And I love that because I think it really speaks to a lot of athletes. When one chapter closes, the next one opens, and then you have that pen in your hand and you can write that chapter. So, like, what is the future that you want for yourself? What kind of life do you want to create for yourself? And write that down, think about it, and make it happen. So that's just some like 3 pieces of advice that I like to give my student athletes. So I'll leave that with you.
Megan, thank you for your time, insight, and your contribution to supporting our cause and this interview. And I want to remind everybody that Athletes All's mission is to support athletes as they transition away from sport, raise awareness around the challenges of athletic retirement, and empower athletes to develop beyond sport. We offer many, many services to support athletes from all levels of sport and from every sport, and at no cost to the athlete. So for more information about our program, to watch other transition talks, visit our website at athletesoul.org. Thank you.